All right. Welcome everyone to our 2024 Data Privacy Trends and DSR Management webinar. We're gonna start in just a few minutes. We want to give some time for people to come in. In the meantime, I'd love to know where you're listening from. If you want to drop it in the chat. I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts. Gorgeous day. Curious where you're all from. If you want to put it in the chat, we can get to know each other. All right. And just a note throughout the webinar, if you want to ask questions, we want this to be as conversational as possible. You can put any questions in the chat and we'll either get to them during the webinar or at the end we have a Q&A section. Love all these Californias. North Dakota, nice. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. All right, so like I said, welcome to our Privacy Trends Report webinar and DSR management. So for today's agenda, we're going to discuss DataGrail's 2024 Privacy Trends Report that covers trends, benchmarks, and insights, particularly around the consumer and data subject requests types, volumes, and costs associated with processing them. So if you want a copy of this report, we're going to put a link in the chat so that you can download it, follow along, or read it later. You can also visit datagrail.io/resources/privacy trends 2024. So this webinar and the report generally is going to be helpful for you if you're wanting to understand the privacy request volume increases and what types of data subject requests that companies are getting, how companies are, handling that year over year and how that compares, and potential costs and, how that compares year over year. So we hope that when you leave this webinar, you're able to use this data to help contextualize and benchmark sort of where you're at and what you're experiencing at your own company. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists.
Oh. Hi, sorry, I realized I'm the one who's controlling things here. My name's Alicia DiVittorio. I am a privacy expert and advisor at DataGrail. I've been in the data privacy space for more than 10 years, starting on the mobile security side of things and from mobile privacy, and then transitioning into data privacy with DataGrail. I'm really excited to take you through the report that I worked on this year and have done for the past 2 to 3 years at DataGrail.
Thank you, Alicia. Sean, I'm going to pass it over to you. Will you give a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sean Kellogg. I am Privacy Counsel at Dexcom. And as Privacy Counsel, I have to say everything that I say today is my views and not those of Dexcom, and I'm not trying to give anyone legal advice today.
Awesome. And Paulina?
Absolutely. Good morning, good day, everybody. My name is Paulina Pribitkova. I work with privacy here at Slalom Management Consulting Firm in NorCal market, and I worked with GDPR extensively back in Norway, where I spent most of my professional life, and I'm really excited to be talking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. We're excited to have you as well. And Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Sammy. Hey, everyone. My name is Eric Brinkman. I'm the VP of Product here at DataGrail. Been in privacy and cybersecurity space for quite a while, always on the product management leadership side. Today, I'll be talking to you about our industry-leading request manager product, as well as some of the new innovations that we have for that product that are available now. I'm excited to do so. Thank you so much for your time, and back to you, Sammy.
Thank you, Eric. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. We're really excited for this discussion and to have you all here with us. I'm Sammy. I'm on the product marketing team at DataGrail, and I'm going to help moderate this discussion. Also, I realize the chat is disabled, but in Q&A, you can ask your questions there, and we'll make sure to get to them. So Alicia, I'm going to bring it back over to you because you actually wrote this report, and you have done so for the last few years. So I'm curious to hear more from you about the methodology and also why something like this matters. Why does it matter that we're looking at this data in terms of data subject requests.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sammy. So when I started doing this report a few years ago, the ultimate goal was really just to bring a little bit of clarity to a very kind of unclear, opaque situation. CCPA had just gone into effect. GDPR had been in practice for a couple of years now. We were hearing from our customers that they were a little bit confused about what to expect, how many DSRs they were going to be getting. So I wanted to take a step back and provide some data and context around what we're seeing in the marketplace so that our customers and our prospects and just everyone in the privacy industry could really understand and benchmark where they sat and where their privacy program sat relative to their peers. So what I've done, our methodology is simple, but there's some complexity to it. This year's report looks at DSRs submitted from January 1st to December 31st in 2023. You'll see throughout the report that we call something called, we use the word identity. And what we mean by identity is a unique customer or consumer record or employee record within a business's database. To get at the estimated cost around data privacy and issuing DSRs, we use Gartner's $1,500 amount. They estimate that it costs about $1,500 to process a single DSR manually. And then because we're using our data sets quite varied, large companies, small companies, I am using a 10% trimmed mean, which basically means I cut out the top 10% and I cut out the bottom 10% and really just look at the middle folks to really get a better benchmark for you as we're thinking about where the numbers of DSRs to expect at your business. And if we really want to take a quick look at the initial kind of big flagship unveiling that we had, is the fact that data privacy requests went up 246% in 2 years. And so what we're seeing here is you have around, 500 DSRs per 1 million identities in 2021. And now that's 859 DSRs per 1 million identities in 2023. That's a huge jump. And what we've seen over the years is deletion requests continue to be the most popular request submitted by consumers and by employees, followed by deletion and access requests.
Wow, that is a huge increase. I am curious for the audience what your experience has been over the last year, and if you're seeing this at your company. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? We're going to launch a poll. It's anonymous, but we're curious if this resonates with you. And Sean, particularly at Dexcom, I'm curious how you're seeing this. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it in line with this sort of trend and benchmark?
Yeah, I'm really happy to see this report because it shows that I'm not crazy. Somewhere around 2021, we quadrupled our volume in over a month, and we had no idea why it quadrupled in over a month. And I've been trying to explain to the business for years now why I keep asking for more resources and more money and more people to help with things. And so this was very helpful because we have seen that 200% rise in requests. We're probably closer to 300 or 400% on our side, but definitely. Outside of the do not sell, we have a different workflow for do not sell, so we don't lump those in with their DSRs. Outside of that, these numbers look correct to me, at least in my experience.
Nice. And from the audience perspective too, we just got the poll results back, and 76% of our attendees today say yes, we've seen an increase. Around 20% have said it stayed the same. So I think a lot of companies are feeling this, and Sean, you're seeing this even higher. I think what we can sort of assume is that consumer expectations are changing. Polina, does that resonate with what you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely. Took a moment to unmute myself here. But yes, so as management consulting firm, we work a lot with our clients on those challenging issues related to privacy, where we help them with transformation in terms of business processes and their engineering background. And this gets on the top of our clients' agenda definitely more and more, especially the drivers like enhanced regulations, more and more complex regulations in different geographies, different locations. There are more expectations from their consumers, their clients, to provide that level of privacy and handle the data with respect and care. And also we see that more and more clients understand that it is way easier to focus on privacy from the beginning and have that privacy by design approach, which also shed some light on these issues.
Great, thank you. And Alicia, you know, to both Paulina and Sean's point, more requests, more has to change within the organization. How do I process all of these? Do I need more people, more resources? So I'd be curious what the numbers are telling us in terms of costs and how costs are associated with this increasing number.
Right. So if we take a look and we extrapolate what that surge in requests means for costs, we are estimating that if you're doing things manually, DSR management can cost $800,000 per 1 million identities. So if you have a customer database of 2 million or 2 million identities, that's going to be $1.6 million just to be processing your DSRs. And this number only takes into account access and deletion requests. We're not even considering do not sell and do not share, because as Sean said, that's typically a different model and approach to how you actually get those requests completed. So we really wanted to just look at access and deletion requests to factor this number in. So, and this number takes into account several things: the number of employees and the cost to have those employees, the hours and hours of emailing back and forth to say, hey, did you delete so-and-so's data out of XYZ database? All of these things, plus some of the tools and the processes that it does take to get this done.
Yeah, like you mentioned, there are a lot of things that go into this. There's interviewing different people, or, you know, trying to find the data. Where does it live? Is it in spreadsheets? So, you know, while on the surface, it may seem like, okay, we're fulfilling a request. There's actually a lot that goes into that. And, you know, we've seen at organizations when there isn't some sort of automation helping, that it can range anywhere from like 200 to even 300 people involved in a single request. So Sean, I know that you now have some automation helping you, but I'm curious about your experience managing these requests sort of before you had that, and some of the costs that were associated there.
Yeah, I would say we probably weren't 200 to 300 people. We were definitely 50 to 100 people per request before DataGrail. And it was a very manual process. We were pushing the deadline pretty much every single time we had to make a response. And so when we started seeing numbers rise dramatically, we knew that automation was like, wasn't going to get another 100 people to help me. I wasn't going to double my budget. And so we had to figure out how to do things more efficiently, faster. And so we have almost automated our entire process at this point. There's still a few human checks and manual checks that go into it, but I would say each request now takes, on average for us, usually a week or two, but most of that's just doing legal checks and security checks. And so we've automated almost the entire process at this point. And we are well below the Gartner cost, much lower than that, which makes my boss very happy.
Yes, that's what we like to hear. Alicia, you mentioned access and deletion requests here. Are you seeing a difference in velocity for each of these types of requests?
Well, I don't know. We are seeing that deletion requests typically are the most popular request. I don't know if the velocity of those requests are going up a significant amount. It continues to kind of stay between to being like, 60 to 40% of total requests, but they are the most common, and it's intuitively makes a lot of sense. People want their data deleted if they're done with a brand, or they've kind of lost trust in a brand. So that's what we see on the deletion side of the house. But they are a very complicated request to make. And I think, Paulina, you have experiences working with your clients and why deletions are so complex.
Yes, absolutely. So just to build up on that, on the brand recognition, we all hear those cases with Google, for example, or other big tech companies who actually do not delete the data despite promising that and break that promise, and just end up on the front page of newspapers, and nobody wants to be there. And where we work with our clients is to build up that business case to explain the privacy, explain why this is important to business stakeholders, to senior level executives, since privacy is often perceived as a cost. And and we help them to understand that this is a strategic investment, that this brings benefits, and how all these compliance efforts to change the technology and introduce new tool to save costs, how these can help the business and improve the bottom line.
Melina. And Alicia, we do have a question in the chat that I'd be curious to get your take on, is around trends related to when DSRs are submitted. So I think most companies probably go through some sort of waves or surges, whether it's, the holidays, or you have a big marketing campaign, or, something around those lines. Have you seen anything in the data that is in regards to when and waves and surges?
At this point, the one true thing I can say that we can appoint a surge and request to is when we see a big privacy policy change. And the point in time that sticks out the most to me is, I think it was in 2021 or 2020 when CCPA went into effect. There were a ton of requests that went through, mostly because I think everyone was changing their policy to accommodate the new law. And so everyone had their policies sent, and I think people forgot, oh my gosh, this brand has my stuff. And so we saw a huge surge then, but typically that's when I've been able to kind of really correlate and see that there's a relationship. Otherwise, I do think intuitively, if like you have a big campaign go out, we do see that sometimes, but I haven't been able to find points of time throughout the year other than privacy policy changes. I don't know, Sean, have you seen anything from your perspective?
I'm in the middle of it now, but holiday weekends in the US generally, right? Like Memorial Day is a big one for us, Labor Day. We always get a bunch over Thanksgiving and Christmas. We think people just have more time on their hands to make privacy requests, and so we get to see a surge of them. But it's always a fun Tuesday back after a Monday holiday.
That's really interesting. And Sean, are you seeing deletion requests be the top type that's coming through for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing to me like how in line like Dexcom is with the industry, just with the standards. I think our deletion percentage was right between 40 and 42%. And every time I add new numbers in, I expect the deletion numbers to go up just based on how many requests I've had to deal with that month, but it's usually within the 40 to 42% range. Our access requests are a little bit higher, but we also classify more things as an access request than I think the industry typically does.
Interesting. And I think, we've talked about it a little bit, but it's definitely a clear sign that consumers are more aware of their digital footprint. And like you said, Alicia, when they get some sort of privacy notice change, oh my gosh, this company has access to, certain things within my data. And I think a lot of the first step for consumers when they're on a website within their own privacy journey is consent and opting in. And that sort of sparks somewhat of a privacy dialogue. And I think that consent and DSR fulfillment can go hand in hand. Lisa, can you talk a little bit more about how these two work together and some of the trends that you may be seeing around opt-outs?
Yeah, let me just answer Barry's question. He asks, are the costs in the US associated with removals similar to those incurred in the UK or in the EU? And I think the answer is dependent on mostly how many systems you have. I think the more systems you have, the more SaaS you have, the more, if you have 2 instances in Europe and the UK, the more complexity, is it going to be more expensive? But if you have the same number of systems in the UK or US or whatever, I think the cost parity would be about the same, would be my estimation. It's hard to say for certain, but that's kind of just my gut based off of knowing the complexity is added when you have more systems and more people involved with DSRs, and that's what adds the cost. But go into your consent, Sammy. Yes. So opting out and consent are very related. But what we found is that the volume of do not sell requests per 1 million identities went up over the past couple of years. This past year, it went up to 280 requests per million identities. And again, I think this goes back to what we've been all hitting on, is that consumer expectations are increasing. The fact that for California, you have to have the little "do not sell my personal information" on the footer of your homepage makes it very easy for an opt-out request to happen, which is why we see a fair amount of these. The other thing that's similar but different but related that we found is that along the lines of consent, we found that actually, after doing an audit of 5,000 different companies, 75% of them were actually not compliant with the new global privacy control that is required by many of the new state laws. This means basically, even if a consumer like myself had put set my GPC to say fire no cookies whenever I visit any of these websites, most of the websites, or 75% of the websites, actually fired 3 or more cookies despite me setting that preference. And we can't say why exactly, but we estimate and we believe this is likely because, frankly, consent's become a very complex thing to do. And companies may think they're compliant with the new consent policies, or maybe thinking that they are compliant with GPC, but actually, in fact, have not set their cookies on the back end up appropriately to actually respond to those controls and those signals from GPC. So this is a big area that we're looking into and trying to figure out how we can help help businesses ensure they're compliant with GPC and the other kind of like more standardized protocols that are going to be available as this sort of consent and cookies, as cookies kind of phase out and we see this new type of consenting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Sean, do you have any thoughts on this and how Dexcom has sort of gone about this?
Yeah, I mean, cookies and GPC have kept us up many a night over on the Dexcom side. Mostly because it's just the biggest challenge for us is, and I think it's the challenge across the industry, is just collaborating between a privacy unit or a legal unit and then a marketing unit, or trying to disseminate the information why this is important, why we need to comply with this, how we need to comply with this, and then receiving the pushback of, well, now our marketing is not going to be as effective. So like, what do we do about that? And so for us, it was coming up with creative solutions to try and make sure our marketing was still effective and our marketing dollars are well spent, but at the same time being compliant with the law. And so it was a very complicated conversation. I feel a lot better about it now, but we spent probably the better part of a year intensely talking about this at least once a week, if not multiple times a week. So, but good luck, everyone, I guess is what I would say.
Very encouraging, Sean.
Awesome. And Alicia, I'd be curious now to sort of dive into industry trends. I know we have a question on that in the chat as well. So yeah, passing it over to you.
Yeah, no, this is great. So I think it was Tom, you asked a question around B2C versus B2B. We have a little bit of that data, which is a kind of exciting. So what we found is typically e-commerce companies and B2B marketing tech solutions typically get the most requests. An e-commerce company could be anything like a fashion shop online or anything of that sort, or even like a health survey company, if you will. B2B marketing tech are survey companies, CRMs, email marketing kind of solutions falls into that category. I separated out B2B tech because we do service a lot of those more like enterprise tech companies, more like API security or security solutions where we saw fewer DSRs. And then retail, I categorize retail as like the brick and mortar who foundationally sell their products in a retail setting versus online. And that's why we saw fewer. You're not getting as many online touch points, which is why we saw fewer DSRs, or at least that's why I would estimate why you get fewer DSRs. Yeah.
Sean, do you think because you're in healthcare, that's why you're seeing some of that surge in requests?
I think it's why we have higher access requests than normal. We've been trying to comply with HIPAA for even before the GDPR and CCPA, and that has different access requests in it, access request rights. And so this is something that fulfilling an access request was something we felt like we were competent going into. It still took a while and was expensive, and DataGrail has definitely helped us automate that piece of it. But I would say my experience with the healthcare industry, we get more access requests, and our deletion requests tend to be more targeted. It's let's delete my whole account, but can you delete this specific piece of data from me, which is you could classify as a rectification request or a deletion request based on how you're classifying it. But I think healthcare is definitely the reason why we're higher on the access side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think there's been some questions in the chat around, US, UK, and different locations. Alicia, can you chat to the variance there as well from a location perspective?
Oh, yes, not by industry, but I can talk more broadly about just the sheer volume of requests by location. So what we found, most shockingly, is that 80% of DSRs come from jurisdictions that don't actually have a privacy law. And the way we track that is we look at the IP, we look at where the IP of where the request is coming from. And what this tells me is that really consumer expectations are up, and that while maybe a law in the United States didn't go into effect just yet, people from that state may have submitted the request regardless. But you can kind of see within the US alone, 34% of requests came from outside a jurisdiction that was protected last year in 2023, which we included as California, Connecticut, and Colorado. And then abroad, internationally, 46% came outside of the EU or UK. Now, India is protected, is protected, and Indian request would have fallen under here too. But like the Brazil LPD, I'm missing on my acronym, is in here as well. Now, I will say, being a US-based company, our numbers skew more US-based. So I wouldn't say this is representative of like where global requests and where they're coming from. We see more requests in the United States because we service more companies here. But it still just shows the more macro trend that requests come from anywhere. And most of our customers are actually honoring requests regardless of whether or not that person is protected by a law.
Yeah, Paulina, I'm curious how you are seeing customers handling requests outside jurisdictions.
Yeah, absolutely. On the personal note, I can relate to this so well. When I recently been to Norway, I could see this right away in my Instagram and Facebook feed, how different it looked, the number of ads, type of the content that was pushed on me as a consumer when I was physically based in Europe. On that side of the pond. Otherwise, what we see with our clients is they apply actually the same policy, the same rules for all their clients, so all their customers across the globe. This is to simplify the cost of running business and make the policy implementation easier. And as we work with them through those transformation efforts, through training their employees, reestablishing processes to support those privacy programs, it definitely makes it easier to just apply one standard to the whole client base across the globe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sean, are you taking the same kind of approach where you're, sort of picking some sort of policy, whether that's a very strict one, and sort of applying it to everyone?
Yeah, so we generally take the strictest policy, at least in terms of deadlines. But we have one policy that we use globally, and as the person who writes the policies, I only wanted to write one and keep one up to date. So that's the reason we chose it, is for ease and the simplicity of training new people and being able to onboard new team members.
Got it. Awesome. Alicia, before I pass it over to Eric to talk a little bit more about how you can start to automate some of this, is there any sort of closing notes or numbers that we didn't get to that you want to close off with?
I don't think so. I did want to address a couple of the questions that I see in the chat before we transition. I think, Daniel, you have a question around, I think, third party, automated agents or third-party agents submitting requests on your behalf. And we do see that. Yes, we do see, automated agents coming in and submitting requests on behalf of a third party. And DataGrail certainly supports that. I don't have any numbers on the breakdown of how many of the requests we're seeing are from automated agents versus direct from the direct consumer or employee. But it is something that we can do, and absolutely can do well. And then on the question around GPC, Michelle, I can't answer your question around the 1, 2, 3 GPC online, but we will get you. We have a couple really great blogs that breaks this down for our customers, because we saw a lot of confusion in the market when it first came to market last year. So we can either follow up and send you a couple of those blogs that kind of give you the 1, 2, 3 on how to kind of make sure you're doing GPC accurately.
Great. All right. Continue the questions as they come to mind. We'll keep getting to them, and then we also have a Q&A question segment at the end. So we've reviewed the trends and the insights and benchmarking, and what we have seen, through anecdotes is it's sort of like an iceberg or like a duck that's in water. From the surface it looks, like you're fulfilling a request, but beneath the surface there are a lot of complexities that go into this. And also like where is this data and who do I need to go to? And what we found, like Sean had mentioned, is that automation is really the best way to help streamline this. So Eric, I'm going to pass it off to you so you can talk a bit about this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sammy. It was great just hearing all of the stories from the field, and it's great to hear that our request manager product has really helped to streamline a lot of these use cases. But before I dive into our product, I just want to like level set the context here. So if you go back in time, the primary way that these data subject requests were fulfilled were through a ticketing workflow. So you would have a ticket that comes in, and then the ticket system would say there's these 30 systems that you need to go and delete or access data out of, and each one of those systems has a different owner, and you can imagine the spiraling effect, right? That becomes very complex and very error prone, and that's just for a single request. And so when DataGrail was started, one of the thesis of the companies was that we want to automate everything that we can. We want to take all of the error-prone activities and the human error out of as much of this as we can, and programmatically surface and deliver privacy with APIs and service calls. And this is a very common principle in many other aspects of software development, and absolutely should be extended to privacy. In that when you can utilize an API to connect systems, then you should be able to do things programmatically. So how that manifests itself in privacy is whenever a data subject request comes into a company, you should leverage as many API calls as possible to either delete or access that data. And so enter DataGrail's request manager product, which is a market leading and fully automated product to manage requests, data subject requests. And the way that this is built is on top of what we call our DataGrail integration network, which has over 2,000 integrations. And so what we do is we programmatically connect to all these systems. And so when an access or deletion request comes into play, what we'll do is, of course, log that request inside of the platform. And then we will essentially orchestrate all of the calls that need to happen to each of the systems, and then we'll return that data. So if it's a deletion request, of course, like we'll delete the data. If it's an access request, we give it to the privacy manager, and the privacy manager can then respond to the consumer in whatever way is most appropriate. And so the primary benefits of utilizing this product: simplifying your data subject request. Of course, we just talked about that. Process those requests in minutes without the risk of human error. Collaborate very easily with your teams. You can assign system owners to help manage those programmatic connections I was talking about, as well as the ownership on what to do with the request after it's been processed. And then verification. I think there was a question about verification and third-party requests. We have a few different ways that you can verify the contacts as those requests come in, and we have a really cool system utilizing smart verification as well. If you need to connect to like a different system of record to verify the identity of the person making the request. And the cool thing about that particular feature is that we don't require any sort of like super sensitive or personal data. We're not asking for data that you haven't already given to the customer. We're only asking for data like such as, give us the last 4 digits of the last order that you had, on Shopify or something like that. If you're utilizing Shopify as, say, your system of record. And so lots of customization options here. But there's one thing that we launched recently that I really want to talk about that provides ultimate customization of managing data subject requests, which is our workflow automation feature. So this is basically the fastest and most flexible way to fulfill your privacy requests based on your unique business processes. So for example, if you want to have a process managed differently, if it comes in from a certain location or if it's under a certain policy, you can now do that with our workflow builder. So this is a screenshot of the actual DataGrail product. Essentially what the workflow automation feature allows you to do is to provide custom management for each phase of a request processing based on conditions. It provides an intuitive workflow builder to help you manage those custom data subject requests. We allow for conditional logic. Like, for example, if your policy is CIPRA, you can provide a certain branch of the workflow, and we then allow for actions. So, for example, if a certain condition is met, then execute an action. An action, for example, would be send an email to a requester. So you can imagine the use cases for this are actually pretty common. If you can go to the next slide. There we go. Employee data subject requests. These are absolutely treated differently than a consumer data subject request. And so automating the processing of employee access requests that provides, a different path for those types of people. Because you have different rights for employees versus consumers and so forth. There might be some data you need to keep on them and so forth. And so that is a very common one, and that's now legislated with several state laws. Integration sequencing is another very fascinating use case here. So prior to workflows, our orchestration engine would just asynchronously go out and make all these calls. And there wasn't, a strong aspect of sequencing, which was fine in most cases. But in certain cases, what we were seeing was that there was a source of truth of data that was then propagating itself out into other places. And so when that happens, you now have a little bit of a messy state where you think you've deleted some data, but you actually haven't, because it somehow got propagated before you could, remove that system from the request. And so integration sequencing allows you to ensure that your data remains deleted by basically making sure that those source of truth systems are processed first, and then you can process all of the other integrations. You can also deny requests based on location, so filtering out the noise by setting in, deny requests to customers who do not fall under a certain policy, and then programmatically retain data as well. So, for example, if you think that you need to keep data in a given system, you can exclude that system based on any sort of workflow conditional logic that you have. These are just 4 common use cases that we have seen already implemented in the platform. Of course, there's going to be a multitude of other ones that come on board as more laws are written or more organizational policies are put in place. And this is what it looks like in action. You can go to the next slide. So how it works, you define your specific conditions, then you define how your processing is orchestrated to essentially manage the request. And then you automate the process through different ticketing phases. And so you can see as the mouse cursor there is kind of going through the different logic conditions. And you can say, true or false, if this, then that, then you can have branches, and you can see how the request could process differently. And this is all, once again, a screenshot of the application, a very visual experience. It's very easy to follow and understand how these requests are processed, and they can be updated at any time, of course, as well. So very excited for this feature. It allows for a huge amount of enterprise customization. It allows for a huge amount of flexibility with respect to various pieces of legislation that are coming online. And if you're a DataGrail customer, we thank you, and we hope that you have a lot of value from this feature, and let us know how you like it. And if you're not, we hope that you would consider it based on what I've just shown you. All right, Sammy, back over to you.
Before I take you off the hot seat, I do have 2 questions that I'd love for you to help answer that came through the chat. So the first is, how do you ensure 100% deletion? What happens with data sources that you're unable to connect to the tool?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are certain integrations that we have that we can't programmatically connect to, and that's not something that is a limitation on our side, but it's probably it's a limitation on the other system side. So for example, maybe they don't even provide an API call for us to delete data from. So in that case, what we do is what we call a direct contact integration. So we have a lot of orchestration that will just like automatically send an email to, like, maybe there's like a support address over there. And so, we'll automatically draft and send that email saying, hey, this customer needs to delete their data please comply with that. And so they have likely an internal process where they can do that. But then that'll be part of the overall like life cycle of that ticket to be processed. And so, it likely can't be closed out until you hear back from that system. And so in some cases, it does require a little bit of manual effort to coordinate with that other third party. But I'm also hopeful for a world, maybe a few years from now, where things like creating, updating, deleting, reading, I mean, these are just API calls that most systems have access to now. And so anytime I see someone with the ability to like not delete data via an API, it kind of just pains me a little bit. And so hopefully that these direct contact integrations, kind of decrease in number over time. And then, to prove that we've kind of deleted the data, we'll make a call to make sure that like we don't see that data anymore on those systems as well. And so in some of the cases, we can programmatically prove that. In other cases, like the ones I just mentioned, we kind of have to take the other company's word that they did it, because there's not really a strong way for us to prove that, unfortunately. And so but we provide as much information and as many tools as possible on behalf of the privacy managers that are using DataGrail to give them kind of the highest confidence possible. I don't know, Sean, you're a kind of a practitioner user of the platform. I don't know how you might want to speak to this as well, but that's kind of how we do it internally.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it as well. We don't generally ask other companies to delete data out of their system, but we'll go into like our instance of our SaaS provider and delete the data out ourselves. So it's a Dexcom employee that is confirming the deletion. So there's a little bit more trust and security there. But for the most part, the API calls we design in collaboration with DataGrail some custom API calls for some of our internal app systems. And so through that, we have validated that we do delete the data when the call goes through, and that is periodically tested as part of some of our penetration testing and audit testing.
Yeah, I was going to mention, we have something called our internal systems agent, which is an agent that can actually help you extract or delete data out of your own internal owned first party systems where you may have data in a database of some sort. Yeah.
Great. And one more question before we move to takeaways. We have, what is the turnaround time to respond to DSRs? How do you look at HIPAA or state law, or how does one determine compliance? So Eric, I think this might be a good question for you.
Yeah, happy to. So this is completely configurable and up to the users of the DataGrail platform to help decide like what those times are. The way that it actually works on the platform is that you define a policy, and then a policy is basically what dictates how fast or how slow something needs to be completed. So for example, HIPAA or GDPR or CIPRA, they have a certain amount of time that a ticket needs to be completed in. And if you don't complete it in that time, you're out of compliance. With respect to the running of the orchestration that I talked about, that happens, as basically as fast as like the privacy manager wants to run that. And so, with workflows, you could theoretically set up a workflow to say, anytime a deletion request comes in, I just want to run it. And it would run as soon as the request came in. In reality, I think what we see a lot of is there's a manual review process by our customers where they look at it and they want to ensure like the verification of the user is good. And they want to ensure like, okay, I want to make sure that they actually want this. They might want to reach out, have another touch point, but they're legally obligated to do it within a certain amount of time. So it doesn't have to happen instantaneously. But what we found is that most organizations have slightly different policies and where they want those manual touch points. But per the power of the DataGrail platform, I mean, you could run one instantaneously. And I think there's a world out there where, as a consumer, if you go to a site, or a company or a website or some sort of platform that you're using, I would love to see a world out there where you can go to any privacy site on the page and say, what information do you have about me? And it's like instantly returned like an API call. I think that's a world that we're moving towards, but that is not required by law right now. And so hopefully we start to see more of that, but all of this is completely customizable. Hopefully that answers the question.
I look forward to that world as well. Alicia, I'm going to pass it back over to you for some takeaways.
Great. I think at the highest level, I'm hoping the biggest takeaway is we hope you can use our report here to benchmark where you stand relative to your peers and then just the broader, your other data privacy vendors or peers to really understand how you might be able to optimize your program and make sure that you're meeting your consumer expectations as well as regulatory issues that might be coming up. We always want you to be empathizing with your customer, make it easy for them to submit these requests. Try not to bury it too far in your privacy policy, because the easier it is for them, the more they're likely they are willing to come back or whatever it may be. And just remember your brand in a good way. We do recommend honoring privacy rights regardless of jurisdictions. We understand that in some cases that's not what a company wants to do, and we absolutely are okay with it. But if you are comfortable with that, it's something we advocate. And actually, I would love for Sean, you kind of talking about automation, if there's anything here where you'd like to add in, because you are the practitioner who's actually done this and how this has helped your business.
Yeah, so in 2021, 2022, we not tripled our request volume over year, and it was bogging down our systems, and it was causing our overall business to slow down, and so we had to figure out a way to automate it quickly. And so we were using the internal system API that you were talking about earlier. We connected it to our databases, and then I relied on my software engineers to validate that it was working, and now we've gone from close to a 30-day turnaround time to under 2 weeks for the vast majority of requests. And so now that we're 6, 7, 8, 9 times as many as we were in 2021, 2020, we're much faster, much more efficient. Our dollar per request is way down, and all of that is thanks to automating and removing the human element. And I would say the APIs are much more reliable than humans. If you're processing 10,000 requests a year, there's just room for human error in there. With the API calls, I'm much more secure in how I feel about that.
Yeah.
So.
And then I think the next thing kind of we talked about, and I know that there's a couple people who want some follow-up materials tied to this, but really double and triple check your cookie trackers, your GPC signals, make sure your consent is working. And if not, you may need to go work with your web dev team or consider a different solution or something to really make sure that you're actually complying with current regulations. Because frankly, this leads me to my last takeaway, which is at least for US based companies, continue to monitor California's enforcements. And we expect to see a bit of an uptick in these in the next couple months or in the next year, most likely. And the CPPA has hinted to expect more. And I wouldn't be surprised that a few of those enforcements could be related to GPC. So just keep track of that as we're moving ahead, and this is becoming more embedded into our culture.
Thank you, Alicia. So moving into Q&As, feel free to ask questions on any of those takeaways that you just heard, anything that you heard from Eric, Alicia, Polina, and Sean. And here's just a reminder of some of the things that we went through. And we'll also follow up with resources. I know a few of you have asked for those blogs in terms of keeping up with some of those industry changes. We also have a newsletter that goes out monthly called Grail Mail, which does a monthly recap of any types of the top news stories in regards to data privacy. So I'll open it up for questions. You can put it in the Q&A. And we have one to start out. So Alicia, I'm gonna ask you this one. So the question is, we do receive a lot of DSRs via lawyers to start later on lawsuits. Do you consider that as a good evolution to what data protection should mean in 2024 and beyond?
That's an interesting question. So what I will say is we work really, really closely with a law firm called Gunderson and Detmer, and they have actually seen a surge or an increase in lawsuits claiming that businesses are infringing on different companies' privacy, different people's individual people's privacy rights. And they're actually linking them to like old wiretapping laws or consent laws that are very, very old. So it is interesting to see this kind of move towards, individuals filing lawsuits. Whether or not that's what data protection should look like, I would argue probably not. I'm hoping that instead the regulations and privacy protections that our governments and maybe at the federal level eventually put into place will actually protect us, and then again, companies will follow suit. But it is interesting to see there is this surge and there's momentum, because I think people are again wanting these rights and are starting to demand these rights, and really putting pressure on these companies and the governments to really make sure these enforcements mean something. I hope that answers your questions. It's kind of a loose one, but it's interesting to see that's happening.
Thank you, Alicia. We have not a question, but a great comment from Tom that says, don't forget to mention our Slack Privacy Basecamp. We have a wonderful community that's in Slack, where there are job boards and general discussion and lots of discussion from people in the peer group. So we can put a link to that community in this, and we'll also follow up with that. Thanks for the plug, Tom. All right. As questions roll through, I'm also gonna put up a poll. If you're interested in DataGrail or learning more, we have that poll there, and we'll be sure to reach out after the webinar. All right. Any other last questions, comments, feedback? Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. It's been a really great discussion. We had lots of questions come through during, which I think is a great sign. And we really appreciate your time today.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.